going to start now. Thank you. We got a fantastic panel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we're going to keep it fairly short and interactive so that we can answer more questions from you all. You know, I'm an investor and an entrepreneur, and thanks to Chris, from his MIT days, I was pulled into Molecule as one of the early investors. So that's why I'm here. I get to learn from all of you and see what's brewing, and I can't wait to hear from the panel. And Friederike, please take it away.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Friederike Ernst. I am one of the founders of Gnosis. We have built lots of Ethereum infrastructure over the years, such as the Gnosis Safe, Gnosis Chain, CowSwap, and so on. In my previous life, I was an academic scientist. So I was a physicist. So I know all about the pains of academia. And this is also what drew me to this DeSci arena.
And maybe each of you can kind of tell us what you're hearing and what you're thinking, what you're excited about within DeSci. What have you invested in, or what are you looking at?
So I'm super excited about projects that promise to eliminate inefficiencies that we kind of see in academic science. So kind of things like publishing is broken, academic, basically getting tenure. It's also a somewhat broken process. Then kind of the way that data sets are often not published and so on. So I think there's lots of things. So in principle, academic researchers, they're not in it for the money, right? So they are principled and they are really well-intentioned. And I feel like the structure in which they operate, it often doesn't align with what is actually in humanity's best interest. And I see tremendous potential for DeSci to kind of correct that to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. At MIT, we have a favorite saying, which is impact equals invention times commercialization. Here in DeSci, we've got both of those, right? And you need both of those, but with a priority on commercializing, on getting real solutions into the ecosystem. James, you're up.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm James Brodie. I'm a geneticist by training. I spent 10 years in drug development after university. It was very interesting. About halfway through that journey, I found Bitcoin, and I kind of left all of pharma to actually, my dream was to do social medicine development. The tech stack wasn't ready back then in about late 2017. So I set up a fund. I run a fund called ID Theory. It's a crypto asset fund. But we do invest a lot in DeSci, in DAOs, and some other things. I think, oh, and one other thing, I'm also on the board at Molecule. So I was privileged to invest pre-seed in Paul and the team. So it's been a real journey watching this all come about. To your point, I think my broad takeaway from drug development, and I was running a discovery program, was that the patient advocacy groups have this huge kind of amount of power, probably the most powerful groups in pharma, more powerful than regulators, more powerful than the pharma companies. And I always saw these groups as proto-DAOs, very well capitalized, highly knowledgeable, often more knowledgeable than the physicians treating themselves and their children. And they lacked a kind of coordination framework. So blockchains come along and it's perfect. And I'm really excited about these patient advocacy groups kind of turning themselves into bio-DAOs and pushing forward the development of medicines that can really kind of make real impact.
I'm glad you mentioned, rare disease and patient communities. I mean, they have the highest moral authority, right? That's why I invested in Molecule. It's not for anything that we've seen so far. It's for the parents of kids with rare disease, these small communities that just want to accelerate a cure. And there is no substitute for that kind of energy and passion. And it's an inevitability for those things to be popping up on multiple of the DAOs. And I'm excited to watch for it. Elad,
Hey, whoa. So I'm Elad, originally Israeli, as you can hear from the accent, based in Zagreb. I'm originally a computer scientist in my previous life, but moved through machine learning career to investing. I founded Lunar Ventures, which is so we think that the problem with the startup, the biggest difficulty of the startup scene and innovation are the investors. Maybe raise your hand if you think investors are the biggest hurdle and problem. One of the biggest. So we really believe investors are really underserving startups and projects, and we're trying to do a little bit better every day to fix that. So we realized that you need scientists and engineers and technical people to invest in science and engineering. So we started Lunar Ventures, which is a pre-seed and seed fund investing in computer science and other sciences built by scientists and engineers for scientists and engineers, and I hope that there's like 50 more funds like this that get started, and in Europe especially, where the problem is the largest and put us out of business. So that's Lunar. We were also early, led the early round of Molecule, and we are particularly excited. We're not actually very big on decentralized investment because of stupid, our investors also need to do better, but because of all kinds of restrictions. But we invest a lot in tooling, actually. We think that a lot of the problem of DAO governance, investment DAOs, and so on, is that the tooling, the decision-making tooling is not good enough. And I'm not talking about the voting, on-chain voting and stuff like this, which also is very important. I'm talking about literal productivity tooling. So we've made one investment in the space called Samudai, and we hope to do a lot more. And I think focusing on tooling is going to make the whole space much more efficient.
Picks and shovels. Last but not least, my good friend Chris Leiter, who brought me and Bob Nelson into for those of you that don't know, Bob Nelson is the founder of the largest biotech venture fund in the world. He just seeded about a year ago $2 billion into a longevity startup called Altos Labs, one of the biggest thinkers, and he followed us into Molecule with 5 words. That's cool. I'm in. Yeah.
I remember that. Thanks, Zen. Thanks for moderating. I'm Chris Leiter. I'm the founder and general partner at Atria Ventures. We're a San Francisco-based venture fund investing at pre-seed and seed with exceptional founders building at the nexus of technology and biology. So if you're building, love to talk to you. A couple different things that I like about what I'm seeing here. First is, also founding member of Beaker DAO with my good friend James. So if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing in Beaker DAO, please come see James or I and a few other people around here. So I think that one or two things that get me really excited, I think in the pharma and life sciences space, open source has been from the very beginning. If you're a computational biologist or a scientist, most of the software, most of the tooling is open source you've been using for the last couple of years. So how do we kind of continue that tradition inside DeSci? And people like Nicholas at LabDAO building some infrastructure for that's really interesting. So how do we continue that? The second thing that I get really excited about, and Mike Barron is probably somewhere here in the room from Pfizer Ventures, and his talk is later, how do we think about red pilling pharma more about decentralized science, right? Because we do have to think about commercialization, as Zen said, and how do we bring and mature these assets and these DAOs into really truly decentralized drug development, manufacturing, distribution, commercialization, and as Zen said, bring them to the key patient communities that need us and need this community and this decentralized ecosystem to exist. So that is a long way of saying, how do we get more pharma and biotechs involved in what we're doing?
Yeah. What I like to say in our healthcare ventures classes is early stage venture is all about data, right? It's generating cheap, fast data that is directionally correct so that you can make further bets. And so when you're looking at early stage new DAOs or new groups that are passionate about doing something, what kinds of data are you looking for? How are you thinking about clinical trials, risk, and timelines and things like that? Any sense of that? Anyone? Not everyone should feel obligated to answer.
I'll jump in. I think there's a very similar way how I evaluate decentralized science, DAOs or assets, to how I evaluate, I don't think there's any difference of me evaluating a Web 2 startup versus a Web 3 startup, which is in what I look at and what we look at Atria Ventures is very much a path to commercialization. Like the technology has to have a partnering, licensing, or partnership ability with a larger scale player down the road. So what does that mean in decentralized science? What are the assets that are being in-licensed or organically driven by the DAO? Are those matching, or are they in disease areas that have a patient population that is somewhat large? Now, there's exceptions to rare disease, and I'll come back to that. And do we then have the right partners or the right capabilities that we can have in the DAO or down the road in the DAO to make sure that those assets, as they develop, are also being aware of other investors, other pharma that can ultimately bring these assets and IP to trials, to commercialization? Because I think the one big thing that we really need to just level set here is like, right now, we do not have any assets, in the very big phase 3 clinical trials. These are incredibly expensive, and so the amount of capital that we need to attract into this ecosystem is at least 50x of what we are today. Now, I think everyone around this panel knows that capital exists, and it is part of our job here to make sure that we're enabling that to happen. So just to kind of summarize, how do the DAOs, how do they think about the commercialization? How do they think about the partnering? How do they think about, the disease areas that they're attacking is something I look at.
James?
Yeah, one of the areas I'd like to see more data, well, there's no data really in any of these bio-DAOs, is human data. I think, if you're talking about potential out-licensing and pharma partners, they're going to be very interested in human data. I always remember my old chairman used to tell me, I was running preclinical programs, and he said to me, none of that stuff actually really matters. We just need to get this into humans. Now, we were developing medicines from cannabis at the time, and we had all of this empirical evidence, that cannabis was very safe. And I think the hurdle to get into humans was probably a bit lower than it is for new chemical entities. However, there are many clinicians out there and physicians who are mavericks, who have patient populations that are not being well served by current standard of care, who I think would be really open to engaging with DAOs. And Chris has talked about kind of phase 3 data. Obviously, that's really important, right, to get approval of your medicine. But I think equally important is uncontrolled, just data in humans to show that you've actually got something. And just back to the point about my chairman, he said, if we give these compounds to a physician, they will know within 6 patients if they have a medicine. And, that is a signal which you can then go on to develop. We all hear about the translational gap of, moving from animals into patients. It's a very real thing. I think DeSci is positioned perfectly to bridge that gap. But I would really like to see some DAOs working on networks with physicians, engaging them, and, not because you can't do this, right, incentivizing them to start trials, but at least having them get comfortable that they can form relationships with these DAOs and initiate investigator-initiated trials. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the advantage of DAOs is it takes away the overhead of starting a company and getting a team and fundraising when really you want to just jump to, let's look at the data, let's do the experiment. What are the right experiments? Who can do them? And so you postpone and punt on all of that stuff about company formation, which is totally artificial and a huge distraction for an investigator, rather than just focus on, does it have promise? What's the early signal? Let's have folks stand up and start assembling over here, and we'll get through as many questions as possible. Questions? No questions. Really?
Come
yes,
on, there
please.
we go.
Come on up, and come on down if you have questions.
Yeah, if you would launch a DAO in the disease area, which one would you pick? I know what you say, but maybe someone else.
No, I'll let somebody else go. Okay, obesity, Ozempic, whatever, something like that. I mean, it's insane right now. Novo Nordisk is now worth more than the GDP of Denmark, where they're based. But there's a huge patient need and patient market access point with that, which I have a few ideas around on how a DAO could solve some of that. So yeah, but please. Thank you.
All right, next question. And I'm taking rare disease, and let's create a rare DAO, right? Let's just create a rare DAO. Yeah.
Hi there. I think that one of the most challenging parts of dealing with science and DAOs pretty much is the barrier and the friction between people that has tech knowledge and people that doesn't. So how you guys see in the future the relation between DAOs, digital assets, and everything related to that with like the common population?
Oh, that's one I'd love to answer. So I think this is one of the tasks that we currently have as Web3 builders, kind of making things that are easy to use for regular people. Okay, so basically, partaking in a DAO shouldn't be harder than kind of joining a Facebook group or similar. And I think kind of that's something that we can achieve, and we're well on the way of achieving with things like account abstraction, abstracting away gas and so on. So I think we're well on the way of that. But yeah, absolutely, currently the technological barrier of joining a DAO and participating in a DAO is really large, as you can also see in voter turnout and kind of voter fatigue and so on. So yeah, absolutely 100% with you. So yes, we'll build the tools.
Chris.
I just want to add one other element. Not only joining, but like if you're an early stage DAO setting up in the DeSci space, maybe a lot of folks are either patients or deep technical talent. Bringing in a maybe fairly well-known or just a PI, a principal investigator or a researcher in that disease area from the very, very beginning can go a long, long way to getting that community going. And also, by the way, gives us as investors a little bit more confidence in terms of putting money behind it.
And they can be first funded.
And first funded. And, and by the way, that will also be deal flow coming from the PI, their labs, or their connections, right? So,
yeah.
Yeah, it's very important for these DAOs to have a credible kind of core researcher. It gives credibility to the DAO. I think to your point, not on the like usability of these things, but really AI is going to level the playing field in terms of like knowledge and dissemination of that knowledge. And what I love about this movement is actually you don't need a PhD to go in and make like a meaningful difference in one of these DAOs. They're meritocracies. You just need to be a hard worker, and you need to be highly motivated, and you need to be like a doer. You need to be ready to make choices and not be instructed or marshaled around by other people.
Can I answer the previous question, actually? Yeah. So a DAO that I haven't seen proposed, and I think would be really amazing, is that for undiagnosed psychiatric conditions, so I'm thinking ADHD, autism spectrum, and so on. There's I'm seeing a lot of ADHD software, for example, productivity software, let's not call it, for helping people cope with ADHD. I'm sure there's a parallel thing to autism. You don't have to have only psychiatry, only drugs. And a lot of these solutions are very helpful, but they need, and there's lots of people who are underdiagnosed, self-diagnosed, and so on, who I think would benefit a lot from both using products developed by such DAOs and so on. I haven't seen this, but it's kind of shocking to me that no one is going at it. Talk to me if you want to.
I would co-found that with you. Yeah.
All right, please.
Hey, panel. My question is, can DAOs and pseudo-anonymous participation encourage more cutting-edge research without staining the real-life reputation of the participants?
That's a tough question.
What do you mean staining?
Like without impacting the person's reputation.
Can I? So we look a lot at privacy tech, cryptography, zero-knowledge proofs, decentralized identity, and so on, and I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think also you can control for a lot of the risks associated with, well, we don't know who the person is, by having some sort of soft verification or authentication and so on systems that already exist in context of zero-knowledge-based KYC systems and so on. There's a lot of effort inside of the Web3 KYC space that is kind of I think would be easy to adapt to solve problems like this, and that's a really great idea, actually.
Going back to the technological limitations question for onboarding qualified researchers to specific DAOs, I was wondering, mainly for the investors here, the projects that you guys are investing in, obviously they need to build an audience of a group of contributors, better to say, of people that actually can make the DAO work as it should work. What are some recommendations that you give to the projects that you invest in to build this core group of researchers outside of potentially first reaching out to them one-on-one and kind of scaling this into having more people on board to the DAO that are actually qualified and not just degens trying to trade tokens?
And make your answers, please, concise, because I think we're going to end pretty soon, right? Yeah.
Okay, so these DAOs need to have a flow of potential IP NFTs. So I think, business development, going and talking to tech transfer offices, raising awareness that there is capital within these entities, they're ready to sponsor work done, I think is probably the most important thing. Getting the researchers aligned, know that they can have access to capital, and therefore they can generate research for the DAO.
I was also wondering something very similar to what the guy in the show said about psychiatric disorders. In general, psychology, I was thinking, is a big part of things like obesity, because you cannot only find a medicine, it also has something to do with your behavior, and you have to actually just change the way that you eat. And here, I was wondering from this perspective, if you have an IP NFT, it's difficult to maybe see straightforward what would be the IP here in this psychological space, but the good thing is you can actually verify very quickly, and you can probably get therapy with humans more easily done than, I have not heard of animal testing cases for that. I don't know. So what would you do? Basically the question is do you think that a psychology DAO would be viable, and how would that IP look like, and would you invest in something like that?
I think the IP here is a data set, human data set. You can incentivize people every day to fill out questionnaires or whatever, and you can build that data set within the DAO, and that has immense value.
And we just had the president of Stanford have to step down on reproducibility issues with some of this stuff, right? But psychiatry and psychology suffer from the same crap and noise.
Yeah, I'll just add one. This is a super important point to what James said earlier about how can we do uncontrolled studies. Psychology doing, what's the global standard in pharma? Well, double-blind phase 3 clinical trials, right? In psychology, it's very, very challenging to do that for a number of different reasons, especially from Chris's presentation on psy-down, psychedelics. That's going to be a really big challenge. So could a DAO be formed around a psychological disease, or could a DAO be formed around producing really good human data around a range of psychological diseases instead of one? That might be an interesting play, because it's so hard to run trials or at least get some uncontrolled human data in this space.
Yeah, these conditions, these psychological conditions, they're not due to some single, some are some genetics stuff, but they're really complex chronic diseases. They probably have very similar underlying causes, but they present differently in every single different person. So we need this data set to really understand how to treat these things. We need to know what non-pharmacological interventions can do for these people, behavioral treatments. I forgot what I was going to say. I had another point, but...
And that leads us to our last question.
Wait, 2 seconds. So two companies to take a look at here, which I invested in both actually, called Holmusk, Holmusk. Another company called Osmind, Osmind. These are two Web 2 normal companies, but they're trying to find build a longitudinal data set inside the neuropsych space. The last thing I'll say on this is a massive investment space from big pharma is going into neuropsych. So that from an investor point of view is really interesting. Sorry.
We're 1 minute over, but I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative because we started 5 minutes late. So one last question. Who gets the last question? Who didn't? Okay. All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm seeing that most of DeSci is focused around biotech, health, medical. What are other branches of science or places where we could make the most difference?
I think we're going to hear from Moon DAO a bit later or tomorrow, right? Yeah, so space would be very interesting.
Computational chemistry, please. New materials and computational chemistry is like the unsung hero of the next 5 to 10 years, I think. Together with going to space and together with like there's going to be a huge revolution that's similar to what we saw with computational biology or tech bio and so on. So absolutely that.
AI.
And then just my last point to the previous thing. I think these DAOs need to engage with regulators as early as possible, right? To understand what types of data set they're going to be comfortable with to do new types of studies in the future.
All right. Thank you all for the interest, and we'll be at the back of the room. Please thank the panel.